My name is Judy Peterson, and I'm the president and CEO of the Chittenden and Grand Isle VNA. I would really like to welcome you folks here tonight. I think you have a really wonderful evening in store. I know I'm really looking forward to it. The VNA is your home health and hospice not-for-profit organization. The VNA has a huge menu of services really from birth to end of life. I'm very proud to be working with this organization, and I'm just so thrilled to have all of you here to participate with us. MDI, the Madison Dean Initiative, is our educational arm for end-of-life services. Madison Dean was founded by two very special people, Joan Madison and Estelle Dean. If you would you stand for a moment, both of you? And what was their brainchild, their excitement, their really wonderful, caring emotions about wanting to let people know about end-of-life care. It was their initiative that formed the Madison Dean Initiative. And there's now a committee that works with them. And they do a lot of community education and many other projects. It's a committee that I've only been able to attend twice so far, but what a terrific group of people. They've worked very hard to put this event together tonight, and I'd like everybody to give them a big hand. I'm now going to pass the microphone on to Jerry, who will introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Judy. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jerry Amori, and I am a volunteer with the Madison Dean Initiative. I have the pleasure tonight of introducing Jane Brody. Jane E. Brody is the personal health columnist for the New York Times. She joined the Times as a specialist in medicine and biology in 1965 after completing degrees in biochemistry and science writing at the New York State College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Cornell University, and the University of Wisconsin School of Journalism, respectively, and a 2-year stint as a reporter for the Minneapolis Tribune. Her award-winning column is published every Tuesday in the Times Science Times section and in many other newspapers across the country. Ms. Brody is a trusted authority on health and who lectures frequently to both lay and professional audiences on all issues relating to health and wellness, including end-of-life preparation. Her latest book, Jane Brody's Guide to the Great Beyond, a practical primer to help you and your loved one prepare medically, legally, and emotionally for the end of life, is a roadmap to putting your affairs in order or helping your loved ones do the same. Ms. Brody is the only or principal author of more than a dozen books, including 2 bestsellers, Jane Brody's Nutrition Book and Jane Brody's Good Food Book. She has appeared on hundreds of radio and television programs and starred in her own 10-part show on public television, Good Health from Jane Brody's Kitchen. She has written scores of magazine articles and won many prestigious journalistic awards for excellence. She is the mother of twin boys and the grandmother of 4 boys, including a set of twins. Brooklyn born and bred, she lives in New York City. Jane is often heard to say, there is no cure for mortality. No matter what your age or the age of your loved ones, the time to start to prepare is now. At the end of tonight's program, there is a book purchase sponsored by Phoenix Books and a book signing. So please feel free after the program to buy your book and take them over to Jane to be signed. And now, it is my distinct privilege and honor to present to you Ms. Jane Brody.
I first want to make sure that you can all hear me at the back of the room. Yes? You cannot? Okay, we're going to do a little adjusting here with this. Can you hear me better now? No. All right, so what's the problem, guys? Put put it up higher. It is on. No? What do you think? I'm pressing that one.
It's not going anything?
Hello? Hello, hello.
You're live.
It's live.
You can't hear her?
It's all the way up to my neck already. Let's see. No, it'll clunk. Is this any better? Yes?
Better?
Not, they can't hear me in the back. One more thing. All right, just a minute. I'm getting dressed. Or redressed, I should say. You got it?
Try that.
How's that?
Is that any better?
Any better? Okay, good. Excellent. Now all I have to do is be able to see, and we're in business. Now, you know, no matter how healthfully you live, and no matter how well you eat, how much you exercise, or how many supplements you may take, there is no cure for mortality. Sooner or later, all life draws to a close, whether you like it or not. Now, far too many people place far too much faith in the so-called miracles of modern medicine. And unfortunately, too often these miracles, in quotes, make the last months, weeks, days of life unnecessarily painful for the people who are dying and for the people who love them. Now, even if you are currently young and healthy, the better prepared you are to cope with end-of-life issues, the less physically and emotionally traumatic the end can be for you and for the people that care the most about you. Now, there are a few preliminaries in order for this talk. This will not be a talk about mysticism, despite the title of my book. Those of you who may know my work in the New York Times as a personal health columnist no doubt know me as a very practical, down-to-earth person. Rather, what you're about to hear is loosely based on my book, Jane Brody's Guide to the Great Beyond. And in the course of this talk, you will be treated to about 24 cartoons. That's to make this subject a little more tasteful for people. The source of these cartoons is a book called Last Laughs by a New Yorker cartoonist named Mort Gerberg. He enlisted his New Yorker pals to produce cartoons that were relevant to the end of life. Now, before I say another word, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. How many of you expect to live forever? Because if you do, you can just leave right now. This talk is not for you. I will read out the caption so everybody can hear this. Before I go over your test results, can we agree no one lives forever? Now, whether you choose or not to think about it, death is an inevitable consequence of life. And like love and marriage, at least in the song, you can't have one without the other. Oh, it's not going. There we go. Actually, I preferred heaven too, but then the marketing guys got a hold of it. Now, many of you may have already had experiences with physicians at the end of life. Physicians, unfortunately, are among the staunchest of death deniers. Now, this is very understandable. After all, physicians are trained to preserve life. They're not trained to assist death. But the time, I say, is overdue for physicians to speak up, not just for life, but for the quality of life. Now, there was an excellent article written way back in May '08 in the New York Times. It was called "For the Elderly, Being Heard at Life's End." And it talked about the concept and practice of slow medicine, the idea that there comes a time at which it's ridiculous, pointless, to continue to provide aggressive care as a person nears the end of life. It pointed out that treatment of the elderly at acute care hospitals can often be inhumane, and that once a patient and family are drawn into the system, it can be very, very hard to pull back from it because our medical and our social culture has a built-in bias. And that bias is that everything that can be done, should be done, and will be done. Now, of course, most of us, if not all of us, want to live as long as possible. I do. But we don't just want to live long. We want to live long and well. The Times article quoted a former administrator of Medicare who said, "Personal control, quality of life, and the opportunity to make good decisions is just not automatic in our system." A special residence for the elderly in New Hampshire encourages their residents to talk about how they want to spend their last days. And a nurse there said that when making decisions about various options for medical care, quote, "You need to understand what you face, what you most want to avoid, and what you most want to happen," unquote. Now, I'll hazard a guess that most of you would not want to spend your last days, weeks, months, years being kept alive, so to speak, by a panoply of machines. Grandpa's secret of longevity is life support. I'll also hazard a guess that most of you would not want to share the fate of folks like Terry Schiavo. Who remembers Terry Schiavo? Oh, good. She lived, so to speak, I don't really call this living, for 15 years in a persistent vegetative state, kept alive by a feeding tube. Now, avoiding a fate like Terry Schiavo experienced requires planning and preparation, especially planning for the time when you may be unable, as she was, to speak for yourself. Now, one couple in Texas named Douglas and Erin Cramp called it Living with the End in Mind. And they wrote a very helpful little book with that title during the melancholy time when Erin Cramp was battling metastatic breast cancer. Erin made sure that all her ducks were in a row well in advance of her demise, complete with her funeral plans. And as painful as her death was for her young family, it was made much less so by her forethought and by the steps that she took to make sure that things would be easier for the loved ones she was leaving behind. Now, my late friend Jan Jeffrey also made her death less painful for her family by her advanced preparations. During the 2.5 years that, as she described it, she coexisted with her disease, which was a form of cancer that destroyed her immune system, she made sure to contact all the people that she ever cared about. She made farewell visits to her closest relatives, and she spent many weeks preparing her own memorial service, specifying down to the very last detail who should do and say what. I understand old Ferguson wrote the service himself. Here's my favorite. I'd like to be buried in this outfit if I can lose 10 pounds. And some of you may empathize with this one. The poor dear wanted to give his own eulogy, but I'm doing the rebuttal. Now, if I may return to more serious matters, when it became apparent to my friend Jan that treatment for her cancer was no longer helping her, she announced that the time had come to go into hospice, where she could be kept as comfortable and as spiritually buoyed as possible, where her nearest and dearest, including her darling 2-year-old granddaughter, could visit whenever they wanted. Now, you don't have to have been a Boy Scout to know the value of that organization's motto. You know what it is, right? Be prepared, like these young folks. Jason and I want to talk to you guys about assisted living. And preparations should start early as possible, because, folks, let's face facts. You never know. You never know when your time will come. You can be hale and hearty one day and be diagnosed with a fatal illness the next. You could step off the curb and be hit by a car. You could fall off a ladder and end up in an irreversible coma, which is in fact what happened to an aunt of mine who fell off a ladder in her early 40s on the 1-year anniversary of her husband's sudden death from a heart attack. So you just never know. Like, uncertainty, Sylvia, is life's big draw. Now, Terry Schiavo was only 26 years old when she suffered that heart attack that left her brain so starved of oxygen for so long that she was incapable of ever resuming a meaningful existence. Now, if Mrs. Schiavo had had the foresight at that young age to record her wishes in the event that one day she might be unable to speak for herself, her husband would not have been locked in a decade-long court battle to pull the plug that kept her technically alive long after it became medically obvious that she could not recover. Okay, whose turn is it today to try and wrestle that plug away from Uncle Jim? Now, planning and preparation for the end of life is not a morbid task, and it's especially easy to do when you are well and you're not in any immediate danger of being otherwise. My husband and I learned this lesson as one by one our parents died or developed irreversible fatal illnesses. My mother-in-law, for example, had been treated for ovarian cancer 4 years before Minnesota passed one of the very first so-called living will laws in the country. Now, although she seemed well at the time, she wasted no time in writing out a living will for herself. And that very summer, her cancer returned. And when she began hemorrhaging and was taken by ambulance to the local hospital, she had the presence of mind to take along her living will. And upon admission to the hospital, she announced to the medical staff that she was to receive no treatment for her condition. Now, fortunately, this was an enlightened community hospital. And I should say, my mother-in-law was a force to be reckoned with. And at her request, a do not resuscitate notice was posted on her hospital door. Her relatives and her minister were notified and rushed to her bedside. 12 hours later, after many meaningful goodbyes, she died in peace and comfort. Her minister remarked afterward that it was the most peaceful death he'd ever witnessed. Now, soon thereafter, my husband and I completed these advanced directives of our own. Neither of us wishes to have our lives maintained by machines when there is no hope for recovery to a meaningful existence. And I don't want my hard-earned money squandered on futile treatments. Just keep me comfortable. Give me enough time to kiss my children and grandchildren goodbye, and let me go. But of course, such directives can come in any size and shape that you may choose. I want my living will to stipulate that I spend my last hours sipping a pina colada on Maui. Now, furthermore, whoops, we'll get rid of that. Furthermore, as some of you may already know, the so-called living will is not enough. It's merely a guide. It's not a guarantee that when push comes to shove, your wishes will be followed. In my state, it's not even of New York, it's not even a legal document. I'm not sure what it is here. It may not be available when it's needed. The doctors who care for you or your loved one may be too afraid of liability to listen to what it says. But most important, it is virtually impossible for any document that you record in advance to cover every sort of medical contingency that could arise, including this one. Could you give me another hour, pal? I just took a Viagra. That really speaks to modern times, right? But what can be adapted to particular situations and is legal in nearly every state is a healthcare proxy. The assignment of a person, preferably two people, who can make medical decisions for you when you can't make them for yourself. And that is part and parcel of what an advance directive should be. And in fact, if you are hospitalized for any reason in most states, the hospital is going to ask you whether you've completed the assignment of a healthcare proxy. And if not, probably hand you a form and ask you to do so right away so that it can be part of your in-hospital medical record. Now, your healthcare proxy is not something you just say, tap your neighbor on the shoulder and, will you do this for me? That person should discuss with you the conditions under which you would and would not want various types of therapies. These do not have to be written down in great detail, though it is a very good idea for your healthcare agent to have a copy of your completed advance directive. And on the back of the room, is it outside the room? I guess there are brochures that have been distributed by the Madison Dean Initiative that include a wonderful, let's see if I can put my hands on it so I can show you. No, I can't, but it's here. It's a wonderful brochure that lists the kinds of questions that you should be discussing. It's just this, it's in this piece of paper somewhere. I'll find it before, hell, here it is. It's Summary of Madison Dean Key Activities. No, that's not it either. It's there. It's there. It's Start the Conversation. It's in the Start the Conversation bigger brochure. I wonder what I did with it. Anyway, it's here. But that's critically important to go through those kinds of questions because these are things people just don't think of. You know, what kind of conditions would you want or not want to be kept alive? Now, you can choose as your healthcare proxy anyone you trust. It could be your spouse if you trust your spouse or significant other. You know, if you think your spouse is trying to get rid of you fast, that might not be the one you want. Also, you may not want somebody who wants to keep you around as long as humanly possible, regardless of the condition you're in. It can be an adult child or a sibling. It can be a good friend. But whomever you choose, it should be someone who is likely to be readily available to medical personnel should the need arise. Thus, your lawyer or your local congressman or a child who lives in another country may not be the best choice. Also not the best choice is someone who is a wimp. The person you choose has to be willing to stand up for what they know you would want under the circumstances. And that person has to be willing to say to the doctor, no, he or she would not want a feeding tube when he's got stage 4 cancer. Or, yes, they would. But regardless of what the doctor is telling you, that you have to be able and willing to express the wishes of the person you represent. That doesn't mean your wishes. That means the person's wishes that you represent. Incidentally, in your advance directive, you can help support life by specifying your desire to donate usable organs to someone whose life may depend on the legacy that you bestow. Not much in the way of hard assets, I'm afraid, but he did leave some highly desirable organs. And in your advance directive, you can name which organs you're willing to donate. After all, you just may want to keep some of them for possible use yourself. Like seeing your relatives in heaven. Mom, Dad, you've gotten back together. Sometimes it takes a very dramatic incident to prove that. This reminds me of my high school boyfriend. Gracious me, I certainly never expected to run into you up here. Or perhaps you'd want to donate your body to a medical school, which is what my husband did. Medical schools need a constant supply of bodies on which students can learn, and body donations are best arranged in advance while you are alive. So if this is something that interests you, don't delay in making the needed contacts with your local medical center. And also make sure that your next of kin, whoever the legal next of kin may be, agrees with that decision. Because once you're dead, you do not own your body. You do not. Your next of kin owns your body. And if that person doesn't agree with what you decided to do, then it's tough luck. Now, both of my sons have chosen this route because penny pinchers that they are, they found out that it's the cheapest way to die. You think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding. They really see no point in having people spend money on them after they're dead. Now, the medical school takes care of everything from picking up the body and embalming it, and they will even have the remains cremated and properly disposed of or returned to the next of kin when the students are through studying the body. Now, while you may not have yet made any preparations for the end of life, you can't tell me that you've never thought about the possibility that one day your life will end. I know you have, because the best read part of the newspaper for which I work is the obituary page, including the paid obituaries in their little tiny print, which some of you probably have to read with a magnifying glass. Now, this Roz Chast, who did this cartoon, is my favorite cartoonist. She is just an absolutely delicious human being. She used to live in Brooklyn, right in my neighborhood, and she grew up in Brooklyn, but she now lives in Riverside, Connecticut, or something like that. Anyway, she still writes for the New Yorker, and this, I have to tell you, if you can't read what it says in the newspaper, it says, 2 years younger than you, 12 years older than you, exactly your age. I have to admit that when Nora Ephron died, I was totally freaked because Nora Ephron was my birth mate. We were born on exactly the same day, May 19th, 1941. And I really felt like I'd lost a piece of myself when she died. I mean, an incredible talent who suffered a lot of difficult times and came through always shining like a rose, or whatever you shine like. And here's another one. His favorite movie was Shane, which he sat through 27 times. This obituary is really thorough. Now, there are some other things that you can do while you're still well and very much among the living. Most, if not all of you, have prepared a written last will and testament designating how your remaining assets, your money, possessions, property, should be divvied up upon your death, and if you're the parent of minor children, who should be their guardians. Now, my mother-in-law, again, hoping to forestall family battles after she died, she's a very smart woman, she was, labeled all of her household treasures as to who should receive them. I mean, there were little pieces of paper behind each thing. And it was amazing because the tactic worked extremely well. There were no arguments, no hard feelings among her survivors. Nobody in the family dared to challenge this self-determined woman even after she was dead. Now, but have you ever thought of certain less tangible assets that could be even more valuable than money to some of your heirs? And I'm talking now about life legacies, memories, life lessons, words of wisdom, even recipes, things that can live on long after the money and other tangible items are gone. Now, after my father-in-law died, my mother-in-law, who had no more than an 8th grade education and never learned to type, decided to write the history of her community, which happened to have been the first Swedish settlement in Minnesota. And her book, which was called Scandia Then and Now, which my husband dutifully edited and typed for publication, because he was the only one who could read her handwriting, remained a popular item in her community for many years after she died. Now, following in her mother's footsteps, my sister-in-law has spent the last 2 decades writing out lengthy vignettes from her childhood growing up in rural Minnesota. And it's a history that would be lost when her generation dies out, but now can be preserved for her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, even her great-great-grandchildren. Now, also, you might want to think about what you don't want to leave behind as a legacy after you're gone. Like this person. I should have made that sex tape. Or this guy, Maynard, your deathbed confessions were disgusting. Do you hear me? Disgusting. Now, there's another legacy that can be potentially invaluable to your heirs, and that is the results of an autopsy. Now, anytime you see a new physician, you're likely to be asked to complete a medical history questionnaire that includes questions about family diseases and the ages and causes of death of members of your immediate family. Now, if you happen to have been adopted, you might not have access to this information. But for the rest of us, knowing what our genetics may predispose us to can sometimes make a life and death difference. Now, when the journalist David Bloom died suddenly while on assignment in Iraq, not from a gunshot, not from a missile or a bomb, an autopsy revealed that the cause of David's death was a pulmonary embolism, a clot that lodged in his lungs. Furthermore, the autopsy showed that this embolism, this clot, resulted in part from the fact that, unbeknownst to him and his family, he carried a genetic defect called factor V Leiden that predisposed him to blood clots. Now, his 3 young daughters can be tested for this mutation, and if any of them have it, they can be advised about ways to avoid the kind of fate that befell their young father. Now, despite what you happen to see on TV crime shows, autopsies are, in more ways than one, a dying breed. In most cases, families have to pay for them out of pocket, and few families now are willing to come up with the $2,000 or so to find out what their loved ones really died of. Newly built hospitals aren't even bothering to install autopsy rooms, and valuable medical information is now being lost routinely in graves and crematories. He's one tough cookie. I've never seen anyone bounce back from an autopsy before. Now to a far more positive trend in modern society, and that is the growth of 2 aspects of care that should be near and dear to the hearts of all who care for people with severe and life-threatening illness, and that is palliative care and hospice care. These are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but they are often, too often, misunderstood. Palliative care refers to the relief of symptoms, physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, spiritual symptoms, existential symptoms, anything that can seriously detract from the quality of a patient's life, regardless of whether that patient is approaching death or is likely to recover. Things like unrelieved pain, nausea, depression, anxiety, concerns about things said or done, or things not said or done, can prompt some patients to seek a hastened death. Yet by treating these kinds of symptoms and relieving a patient's anxieties, the desire to die prematurely can quickly dissipate. Before we try assisted suicide, Mrs. Rose, let's give aspirin a chance. Now, hospice care incorporates all that is part of palliative care, but with one proviso, and that is that the therapy that's aimed at treating the patient's underlying disease be discontinued. Now, in most cases, provision of hospice care when someone is not expected to live beyond perhaps 6 months removes patients' incentive to request a hastened death, because attention is now focused entirely on keeping patients comfortable in the very fullest sense of that word. Hospice care can be provided at home if there's someone who can serve as the patient's primary caretaker, or it can be provided in a medical setting that is more home-like than hospital-like. Now, if you have any qualms about hospice care, I urge you to read this very charming little book by the humorist Art Buchwald, his charming memoir of his months spent in a Washington, D.C. hospice. The book is called Too Soon to Say Goodbye. Now, as you'll discover in Mr. Buchwald's book, if your fortunes reverse, as they did temporarily for him, you can check yourself out of hospice. You can resume treatment at any time if that's an option, and you can return to hospice at a later time if and when the need arises. I think I've lost the will to die. Now, most families, unfortunately, wait far too long to call in hospice. The average stay in hospice is a mere 18 days, and for many dying patients, it's only 3 days and sometimes only 1 day. Waiting too long to access hospice can result in needless suffering for both patients and their loved ones. Having only a few days or even a week with a patient and family gives hospice personnel little opportunity to get to know the patient and the patient's loved ones and provide optimal care for all of them. Now, given adequate opportunity in hospice, every symptom, every concern is likely to be attended to and treated with respect, including this one. And this may only apply to those people who live like I do in places like New York City. One last request. Move my car to the 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Monday to Thursday side of the street for tomorrow. I know that this is going to be my last wish. A gentleman named John Doherty from Oak Brook, Illinois, wrote to me about what hospice care meant to him and to his late wife, Jean, who received a diagnosis of advanced liver cancer on March 3rd, 2006. Quote, "The people who came into our home were the most knowledgeable, caring people I have run into in my lifetime. They made Jean comfortable. They treated her with respect and always deferred to her wishes. Jean died at home on March 29th. That's 26 days later. Her final days made tolerable by having the family nearby and hospice personnel always on call. I miss Jean very much, but I do know that even though she was dying, she always had a smile for us, and she and the hospice people made the whole episode easier to accept." Now, of course, if hospice is not to your liking, you can always resort to the Eskimo way of death. Grandma's going to Florida. That's what I want. Another virtue of hospice care is the assurance that you won't be abandoned by your health care providers. And there's a whole chapter in my book devoted to doctors who disappear when they can no longer provide curative or life-prolonging treatments. The disappearing doctor is a source of great distress, not just to patients nearing death, but also to their loved ones, all of whom are likely to feel abandoned at the time when they most need attention. A gentleman named Robert Greene wrote to his wife's oncologist after she died. The wife is named Hinda. Quote, "Hinda was treated successfully by you for almost 7 years, And yet, at the end, when you realized at the end, to her and my profound disappointment, you failed her. When you realized that you could do no more to reverse her progressive disease and that death had become inevitable, you abandoned her. The empathy that you had displayed was replaced by what she experienced as indifference. Much precious time was wasted trying to turn her mind from your dismissal of her that she experienced as a professional and personal betrayal. What she wanted you to do was simple. She wanted you to speak to her with courage. She wanted you to show a bit of concern, which would have meant as much to her as all the chemotherapy you prescribed while there was still hope. She wanted you to help her die more peacefully. Now, unfortunately, relatively few dying patients outside of hospice care receive the kind of caring experienced by a woman named Joan Kingston, who survived 33 months with metastatic colon cancer. Following her death, her husband wrote a letter that was published in her hometown newspaper in which he expressed the family's immense gratitude for the highly skilled physicians who, despite extraordinarily busy practices, remained, quote, very humane, caring, and communicative with their patient and the family until Joan's last breath. Her husband wrote, quote, "We lost someone we loved deeply. Reflecting on her illness and last month, we recognized that this loss was made immeasurably easier by the type of care Joan received, especially at the end of her life," unquote. We should all be so lucky because we all deserve it. We are, after all human with feelings and fears and worries, as well as ailments that can go on for a long time before they claim our lives. Perhaps equally important is the behavior of medical professionals after a patient dies. In March 2008, the mother of a courageous young woman named Sally Rosen received a letter from the physician who cared for Sally during the last 4 years of her life. Sally succumbed at age 43 to complications of a genetic and inherited syndrome. The letter, which the doctor addressed to Sally post-mortem, said in part, quote, "I wanted you to know what a rare privilege it has been to know you and to be involved with your care. I knew your time on earth was to be short, and the day would come all too soon when you would leave us. I suppose we all knew that, and it made our moments together ever more precious. One of the enduring rewards of being a physician is learning lessons from patients. In this regard, you were certainly my greatest teacher. Though it hurt to bear witness to your suffering, your visits always brought sunlight. Your ability to deal with adversity with courage and humor remains a source of inspiration. Sally, please thank God for me for letting you be here for a while," unquote. Can you imagine how that mother felt receiving that letter? This is what medicine can and should be about for all of us. Each and every one of us is far more than a physical being. We are also emotional, spiritual, and existential beings, and we all deserve to be treated accordingly by those in whom we entrust our medical care. Finally, I'd like to leave you with a message that has been my passion since I first became a medical writer 47, I lost track, years ago. I forget how old I am. No, I don't. I remember very well how old I am. I'm gaining ground every year. And that lesson is how to postpone the arrival of the Grim Reaper for as long as possible. Now, living healthfully is not a matter of stuffing your body with pills and potions that are sold on the internet or that line the shelves of health food stores and pharmacies. In fact, quite a number of those pills and potions may actually hasten your demise. Rather, living healthfully is a matter of adopting a reasonably healthful eating and exercise plan that you can go on and stay on for the rest of your life. Now, many things can happen in a person's lifetime that are out of your control. The 9/11s, the school shootings, the plane crashes, the drunk drivers, the lunatics that walk the streets. These are things that as individuals, we really can do little or nothing about. But what you can control is what goes in your mouth to nourish your body and your brain. You can control whether you let your body rust out or you strive to keep it running like a well-oiled machine by getting regular exercise. You can learn to let life's petty annoyances wash over you and limit your stress to what really matters in the long run. That seems to be the hardest lesson for Americans. You can make your life's goal the same as that of the ancient Greeks, and that goal is to die young as late in life as possible. The great beyond will always be there when you are ready to visit, as long as your memory is intact. Username and password?
Oh, that's
Or if your memory is failing, you can use the student's trick and write your username and password on the palm of your hand so when you get up in heaven, you remember. Meanwhile, I wish you all a glorious time on earth and the opportunity long in the future to go out in a blaze of glory. Like this gentleman. I see it, that bright white light. Quick, get me my straw hat, my cane, and my tap shoes. Thank you. I found the list. It was at the end. This is the brochure I want you all to get. Just make sure you get it because on page 5 there is a list of questions that will help you to do this properly. Now I'd like to take some questions from the audience, comments, questions, whatever. Just raise your hand. There's a microphone here if you can't be heard, but I will repeat the questions. No, come on. I've never had no questions. Yes, sir.
It's not a question.
Comment then.
You mentioned Art. It's not a question, but you mentioned Art Buchwald.
Yes.
And in the final column that he wrote before he died, that was published after his death, the last line said, "What's it all about, Alfie?"
Yes. But he knew what it was all about. It was like keeping your sense of humor to the last possible moment. Yeah, over here? No hands? Come on. Okay.
I have a question about Alzheimer's patients. And in relation to hospice, my father suffered for many years. It was very, very hard to determine what was the length of life going to be.
This is a terrible problem with dementia of any sort, whether it's Alzheimer's or any other kind of dementia, because rarely do people die from that. And they can go on 10 years, really not knowing anybody, which is really unfortunate. But the critical ingredient here is to get to find out what this person would want if and when something life-threatening happens in advance. Okay. It's That's the. I mean, what this may come to eventually is that if patients say that if this happens to me, I want you to help me out of here. I mean, it may come to that at some point, and it's determined by your personal preference, your religious beliefs, whatever. I mean, a wonderful woman on my block had Alzheimer's disease and lived for many years totally unaware of who was around her, and with 24/7 round-the-clock care. And but she had 3 daughters, one of whom was a very devout Catholic, and said, my mother is still there. She's still in there somewhere, and that's it. And eventually she did die, but I have to say that even when the paramedics were called when she died, they still tried to resuscitate her, which was a terrible, you know. Okay, there's a way around that issue also, and that's really important to know about. And there is, do you have in Vermont, do you have the POLST? Okay, in different states it's called different things, but it's a POLST form that your doctor has to sign that directs paramedics to not resuscitate you if you do not want to be resuscitated. And this is, you know, my 92-year-old aunt now has both the DNR and the do not resuscitate rules and the POLST, MOLST, what it's called MOLST in New York. But anyway, it doesn't matter what it's called. The point is that paramedics are otherwise obliged to do everything possible to bring you back to life when you die if you call 911 and they arrive. One of my college roommates had her elderly father live with her at the end of his life, and he very clearly had said he had advanced heart disease. He clearly said he wanted to die at home. He did not want to die in a hospital. And yet when his breathing became so labored that the family panicked and they called 911 and the paramedics came and they resuscitated him and they brought him to the hospital, and the daughter kept saying, but he doesn't want to die in the hospital, and why are we doing this? And they told her, if this happens again, wait 20 minutes before you call us. By then, it is too late to do the resuscitation. So, you know, there are interesting things, little twists and turns that we all need to know about if you want to know about them. If you want everything possible to be done to keep you going for as long as possible, that's your choice. Most of us would not want to be in pain, unconscious, you know, not aware of our surroundings, and just have a breathing body without any life in it. But, you know, just life in a biological sense, but not in a human sense. But if that's what you want, that's what you have to let your next of kin or your healthcare proxy know. I should add one little thing about the Alzheimer's things. One of my good friends, her mother had advanced Alzheimer's, and she was in a nursing home. And my friend made sure that it said on every piece of paper that surrounded her that if she stops eating, you do not feed her. If she stops eating, you do not put in a feeding tube. If she stops breathing, you do not put on a respirator. None of those things. And in fact, they listened to her, because every single time she showed up, she reminded them that this is what her record says, and if you don't do what I'm telling you, you will be sued. You know, the threat of a lawsuit really carries a lot of weight in this. I saw another hand. Yes?
This is a little off the subject, and I'll try to keep it short. But a friend of mine in Florida who had serious, horrible lung disease decided her life was too awful and wanted to let go of her body. She was a Quaker. She didn't want to do anything violent. So she decided to stop eating and drinking. And she called all her friends and loved ones together. And it was beautiful.
Now, what this lady is telling you about, which is really important to know also, and that is that this is legal anywhere. You are in charge of your body. You have the right to stop eating and drinking if life becomes intolerable. And that is what the organization called Compassion and Choices now will tell you if you contact them. That used to be the Hemlock Society. Well, you know, nobody's poisoning people anymore, at least not on purpose. I guess the wife of some Chinese person was, official was being poisoned slowly by somebody putting some poison in her supplement that she took every day. But This doesn't really happen in real life, except in Agatha Christie. But stopping eating and drinking is, when you said beautiful, that is exactly the right word, because that's what everyone who has experienced this has said. It is not painful. It is calm, and it gives people a chance to express their last wishes and people a chance to say their last goodbyes. And it's a very, very peaceful end.
We actually partied at a ball.
Yeah, see, there. A party.
In Oregon, it's legal for a doctor to give a dying patient Nembutal, and that puts them to sleep quickly. What are the prospects on the East Coast for an Oregon-style death with dignity law?
Well,
are there people moving to Oregon now?
No, you can't do it if you just move to Oregon. You have to be a resident for 3 years. Yeah, right. That's the thing. You can also go into hospice 6 months early. But in any case, the in Oregon, I don't think you're right, though. I think in Oregon, you're only allowed to give the patient something that they can give themselves. The doctor cannot do it. But the patient has to be capable of administering whatever it is. They have it. It's not just Washington. It's the state, Oregon. It's the state of Washington, Missouri now, because a judge decreed that it was legal in Missouri for doctor-assisted deaths. But you know something? A woman who spoke at this organization, to this organization last year, Dr. Diane Meyer, also a New Yorker, a brilliant woman, a lovely human being, who started the palliative care service at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. She used to be very much in favor of physician-assisted deaths. And when she discovered palliative care and how it relieved patients of their misery toward the end of life, she realized that assisting them in dying was not necessarily necessary. That if you kept them reasonably comfortable, that patients' desire to get out faster often dissipated. But if you still have that desire to get out faster, stopping eating and drinking is the way to go. To answer your question about whether this is going to happen anywhere else, it probably will, slowly but surely. But just like gay marriage is taking forever to go anywhere in this country, this will take a long time before every state or most states allow physicians to help people die.
Yes, I want to really say something about stopping eating and drinking being a beautiful experience. I had a very good friend who, it was about 8 years ago that she said this is the way to go. She was in her 80s, but she also was very ill, and so she stopped eating and drinking. And she said to me, after about 6-7 days, she said, you know, this is quote unquote misery. She was a very small woman, and she said, I'm really angry with the legislature because I don't have that choice. My own husband, who died very recently, we always said, oh, we'll just stop eating and drinking. He found it much too difficult, even though he died in hospice, and hospice was wonderful. But still, there were those last days when I do believe that we could have spared him. So I just feel that we in our family romanticized the idea of stopping eating and drinking.
Well, I have heard many other tales like the one that the other woman mentioned, where it was a beautiful experience and that the person wasn't miserable. You know, I mean, we all have to choose our own poison, right? Whatever it is that works best for you works. But in hospice, my husband died in hospice, and he was in a lot of pain, and hospice administered adequate doses of morphine, slowly increasing it until he was not any longer in pain and he lost consciousness. But we all had a chance to say goodbye, and for him to be comfortable when we said goodbye, including his grandchildren who came racing to hospice to see him. and he was very instrumental in their upbringing, and so it was a very meaningful experience. So there are other options if you are fatally ill, but I'm talking about people who don't necessarily want that other option of a morphine drip or whatever. And for them, stopping eating and drinking may be the way to go.
I have one comment.
Yeah.
We are lucky here in Vermont. For those of you that have not completed Advanced Directive, we're blessed because we have a Vermont registry. So you can fill it out, give it to your doctor, mail it into the Vermont registry. Once a year, they send you a note saying, is this still what you want? You can change it. It's not forever. So when you're in your 40s and you fill it out, you may want it everything. As you check it like you do your finances every 3 years. Is this still it? So it's not permanent. So we're really, really lucky about that.
Yeah, that's a very important point that you just made, because I forgot to mention it myself, and that is, this is not set in stone. You can write your Advanced Directive today and change it a week from today, if you change your mind. But make sure that the person persons who are your healthcare proxies knows about your changes. It can't be something that just gets put on a piece of paper. They've got to know. Thank you very much. Do you have anything else?
No.
Okay, good.
I have the honor of thanking Jane for her incredible presentation, and we're very blessed to have her and the heart of what went into this difficult conversation. And I hope it helps all of us start the conversation in small groups, in large groups, and the VNA and MDI are ready to help you in any way we can with those conversations. Just let us know. I want to thank Renee again for bringing the books here, and Jane for being willing to sign over here. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your openness, and safe travel. Good night.